Welcome to the Speculations Reading Series, which I believe is celebrating its 20th anniversary right about now. Co-production of Dreamhaven Books and SF Minnesota, which is a sign our guest book. A multicultural speculative fiction organization that also does a midsummer convention, Diversicon. Flyers for that going down. And here is a flyer with some interesting events coming up this fall that might be of interest to you, including our next Speculations reading will be Wednesday, November 18th with Jason D. Whitman. And this Sunday, my book club Second Foundation is going to be talking about the works of Angela Carter. And there will be the annual Classic Horror Films video party on Saturday the 14th. So, that kind of stuff. And tonight we're pleased to have, I'd say about the fifth time for you for the
Fourth or fifth, yeah.
About the fourth or fifth reading within the Speculations reading series. We have done any number of others. By Michael Merriam, novelist, short story writer, editor, all-around good guy. Take it away, Michael.
Thank you, all-around good guy. Thank you. I have in my hand the hat. The hat is going to be given to Andre. Inside the hat is a pen and little tiny slips of paper, which you are going to write your names on, because there are things to give away at the end of the day. Yeah,
dinner and a show?
Yeah, dinner and a show. Come to the reading. So I was trying to decide what I wanted to do, and there was discussion about ghosty stuff and Halloween stuff. And so I'm like, okay, what do I got with ghosts? What do I got with ghosts? What do I got with... I don't really write a lot of ghosts, which is kind of surprising, actually. But I grabbed some of my ghost things, and I grabbed some things that are seasonally appropriate, I guess would be the word. So I'm going to start with a little excerpt from a story called The Foundling, which is, that story is found in Shimmers and Shadows, which is a short story collection. And it's a ghost story, one of my rare ghost stories. The tall, fashionably dressed young woman stood on the second level of the mall, looking down into the courtyard below. The object of her scrutiny, one of the dozen or so kiosks scattered across the floor, was decorated to grab the attention of the busy shoppers in the hope of convincing them to part with a percentage of their net worth. This particular kiosk sold wooden toys, which meant a high number of children, especially smaller children, who could still summon up a sense of wonder at such a simple thing, swirled around the cart. What drew her attention to the kiosk was not its wares, but the person attending it. An ordinary-looking man, he had started working the cart 3 weeks ago. He wore wire-rimmed glasses, suffered a slight paunch around the middle, and a thinning spot on the back of his head that the woman could see clearly from her vantage on the second level. He laughed a lot, and was exceptional at dealing with children and their hairy parents. In all ways, he appeared to be the perfect employee for a toy kiosk in a mall. Last Saturday, as she walked by him, something had made her pause. She had found herself looking straight into his eyes that were inexplicably wrong, and so she had taken it upon herself to watch him more closely. Her gaze shifted, drawn to the sight of the little girl in the pink dress standing separate from the other children clustered about the cart. She frowned. This was the third day in a row she had noticed the girl, and the third day in a row the child wore the same dress. Her frown deepened. She would need to find out if the girl belonged to one of the people who worked at the mall, and if so, take appropriate measures. She looked back to the cart to find the man going on his break. The crowd of children drifted away, much to the relief of their parents who wanted to shop for things besides toys. And as the seller stepped away from his wares, the woman saw him turn his head toward the girl. He had decided on his prey. She looked around for mall security and, finding none, stepped casually away from the rail. The woman flattened herself against the wall behind her and, checking to make sure she was unseen, melded into the building. She came out in the courtyard, stepping from the pillar as a man carrying 2 large bags passed. She smiled at him when he turned his tired face toward her in surprise, then set off in search of the toy seller and the little girl. She caught up with them as they started down a corridor toward the first level exit. There were too many people here, she realized. She would be unable to meld into the wall without drawing attention to herself. She power walked past the toy seller and girl, stepped into the entry foyer. Taking a moment when she thought it would be undetected, she touched the doors and the locks gave a satisfying click. They would not open again until security came with a key. She looked up. The girl walked just ahead of the man, who kept looking around nervously at the other customers. As the toy seller reached over the child's shoulder to open the door, the little girl simply walked through the glass. The woman gave a startled gasp and stepped back, and the little girl gasped at her in return, her brown eyes wide and frightened, and vanished. The sound of the entrance door being rattled made the woman look up. Her eyes locked with the toy seller's. The man frowned in confusion, glanced past her for his lost prey. He took a step backward and gave the surrounding area a thorough examination before finally turning and going back the way he had came. The woman searched the mall all day, but the little girl was gone. And your name, just for the record, the mall security officer held his pen over the form on his clipboard. Sid Dale, the woman answered. Today, she was short and busty and wearing a University of Minnesota sweatshirt. That's Sid with a Y, and no, it's not short for Sydney. Well, the security officer turned to the small boy standing next to the woman. Let's go see if we can find your mommy, okay? Maybe a cup of cocoa? The little blond boy nodded his agreement. Smiling, the security officer took the boy's hand, and he turned back to Sid. Thanks for bringing him to us. We'll find his folks. Oh, it's no problem. I'm just glad I could help, Sid said. She watched as the security officer led the boy away from her toward the promised hot cocoa until they were both out of sight. Sid rode the escalator to the second level, blending in with the crowd around her while she considered what had just happened. When she had found the boy huddled in a ball and crying in the back of a women's clothing store, it seemed like a routine incident of a child getting away from a distracted parent. Then the boy told his story to the guard. The little boy said that he had lost his parents while playing chase with another child, a girl who, according to the boy, ran off the second level and into thin air. The guard nodded his head indulgently at the boy's story, but Sid realized something more was going on. She had started hearing whispers in the walls about a little girl who lured children away from their parents to play. She was so lost in thought that she failed to notice the child in the faded pink dress standing at the top of the escalators until the screams started. Her head snapped up. A woman in too tight pants and a leopard print blouse was howling to raise the dead. The man in front of her, cell phone firmly planted on his ear, stepped through the child, then turned to look at her, mouth open, face pale. As the howling woman reached the top of the escalator, she stumbled forward to the child and fainted. The young couple behind the woman timed their jump to go to either side of the girl, who stood passively as they passed her. The three teenagers next in line shrieked and stampeded back down the escalator. Sid shifted sideways, letting them pass, eyes fixed on the child in front of her. As she reached the top, the girl's brown eyes widened in surprise. Sid reached out a hand for the child and grasped empty air. With a sigh, she stepped off the escalator and turned to survey the chaos behind her. I believe, Gopher said, whiskers twitching thoughtfully, you are infected with some kind of mortal spirit. Sid sat on the sidewalk, back touching the wall of the mall, wrapped in the early morning darkness, regarding the small animal in front of her. Of all the parking lot totems, Gopher was the one she spent the most time with. The mall's designers would have been stunned to discover the creature they had put on signs to assist patrons in finding their vehicles now claimed existences of their own. Of course, they would have been stunned by her as well. I don't understand how, Sid whispered. None of this makes sense. You're sure this child didn't die here? Gopher asked again. She gave her friend an annoyed look. I'm not my idiot sister. I don't let people plunge to their deaths off the escalator. Gopher raised a paw in supplication. Still, there must be a reason. What do you intend to do? She thought for a moment. I really don't know what I'm going to do, but I can't let her continue acting out. It's bad for business. I won't tolerate her frightening the customers away. There's going to be a television crew out here tomorrow doing a story on the haunting of the mall. They're bringing some psychic and a team of ghost hunters with them. Gopher chuckled. Sounds like a bit of excitement. She gave him a sour look. It's going to be a great big circus and it's going to be on the morning news. Gopher looked Sid squarely in the eyes, all traces of his earlier amusement gone. Then you need to make sure they have nothing to report. Sid slowly walked around the courtyard. Today, she looked like any other soccer mom as she tried to blend in with the early shoppers, power walkers, and the simply curious. She exerted herself to the fullest, desperate to head off any manifestation of the supernatural before the news crew or the ghost hunters took notice. She could feel herself already starting to tire from the strain of both holding her mortal shape and trying to use her senses to monitor every part of her mole. She had written off the psychic as a fraud early on. When Sid had brushed against her, intent on determining the woman's sensitivity, the psychic ignored her and continued to drift around in a fake dream state while making generic statements about spirits and cold spots. It was the paranormal investigators that worried her. When she passed within 5 feet of one of their electromagnetic meters, it had gone wild, causing excitement. Fortunately, the reporter from the television station seemed more amused by her assignment than serious. Between the live segments, she and the cameraman quietly poked fun at the whole goings-on around them. And as they finished the last segment and started rolling up their cable, Sid's guard began to relax. It was the ghost hunters who first realized something was happening. The various electromagnetic meters and other sensory equipment began to give readings. The 4 members of the team clustered together, 3 of them wielding meters while another took pictures. The excitement drew the attention of the television cameraman, who flipped on the camera's battery pack and pointed his lens in the direction of the commotion. As he aimed his lens at the group, there came a pop, and a shower of sparks jumped from the back of his camera. Every cell phone in the mall began to ring, and with a sickening twist in her stomach, Sid felt the escalators seize up, sending the few people on them sprawling. She looked for the cause of the disturbance, and after a moment she spotted the girl in the faded dress standing behind a kiosk full of silver jewelry. The look on the girl's face struck Sid as frightened. Sid stopped trying to monitor everything and allowed herself a moment to recover, and then quietly walked up behind the child. "There you are," she said loud enough for the people to overhear her. "Don't run away from me like that again, okay?" She knelt down, and before the girl realized what was happening, swept the child up in a hug. "Come on, sweetie, let's go find you some juice and move out of the way of these nice people." Sid stood, took the child's hand in hers, and started walking away from the courtyard. The cell phones stopped ringing. The escalators kicked on. They walked down one of the long wings of the mall, stopping in front of a food vendor. Sid kept her grip on the girl's hand as she ordered a large orange juice and took some napkins from the counter, stuffing them in a pocket. She paid the woman in loose change, which the woman accepted with an odd look, and still holding on to the child, Sid steered them toward one of the benches. They sat down. Sid placed a cup of juice between them on the bench. She started drying her hand on the napkins. Sid noticed the girl watching her. "I always get a little wet when I summon change from the fountain," Sid said. "Am I in trouble?" the child whispered. "No, you're not in trouble. You're not mad at me? Why would I be mad at you?" "Because I'm bad." The girl looked down at her lap and started to fidget with her dress. Sid gave the child's spirit a closer inspection. There were angry red and black marks on her upper arms. Her top lip seemed to have been busted and partly healed. There was the faint remains of bruising around one eye. "I don't think you're being bad on purpose. Do you have a name?" "Amanda." The child continued to look at her lap. "Hello, Amanda. I'm Sid." Amanda snapped her head up and stared directly at Sid. "I know who you are. That's why you can touch me when no one else can, isn't it?" "I suppose it must be. We're not so different. But you're not..." Amanda dropped her eyes again. "I'm not what?" Sid asked gently. Amanda reached out for the cup of juice Sid had been drinking from. Her hand passed through the wax-coated paper, and the child looked back up at the spirit. "Dead." Scary, spooky self-kill mom. So we're going to stay on the scary, spooky theme for a minute. I did this one at Dreamhaven, I think 2 or 3 years ago. And it's pretty much a different crowd. A couple of you have heard it. Conrad's heard it. Sherry's heard everything I do, pretty much. But the rest of you probably haven't. This is called, Yes, There Are People Who Love You, But... Yes, there are people who love you, but I wouldn't put too much faith in them. Your sister may love you, but your sister also loves insipid pop bands with singers chosen for how well they dance. Taking pictures of herself scantily dressed and posting them to her social media, and torturing underclassmen that aren't as cool as she thinks she is. Your sister may love you, but she's kind of self-centered and mean, so I wouldn't put too much faith in her. Your brother may love you, but your brother also loves peeking through the bedroom window of that hot single mom down the street, driving his overpowered car really fast down narrow country roads, and climbing on and inside of derelict and condemned buildings. Your brother may love you, but he's kind of stupid, and he's probably going to die young, so I wouldn't put too much faith in him. Your aunt may love you, but your aunt also loves wearing makeup so garish it would make a circus clown go. Collecting creepy porcelain dolls and giving them names and introducing them as her family, and singing show tunes to her 12 cats off key. Your aunt may love you, but she is batshit crazy, so I wouldn't put too much faith in her. Your uncle may love you, but your uncle also loves the "hey, pull my finger" joke. Cheap cigars bought at gas stations, standing on the lawn in his house shoes and bathrobe while screaming obscenities at the neighbors. Your uncle may love you, but he's kind of creepy, so I wouldn't put too much faith in him. Your cousin may love you, but your cousin also loves a boyfriend that makes Johnny Rotten look clean and sober, and setting things on fire, and throwing homemade explosives at cars. Your cousin may love you, but she is going to prison someday.
Oh, yeah.
So I wouldn't put too much faith in her. Your father may love you, but your father also loves sleeping in his recliner with his pants unzipped, Pabst Blue Ribbon beer, unironically, and the Chicago Cubs. Your father may love you, but he's kind of clueless, so I wouldn't put too much faith in him. Your mother may love you, but your mother also loves living like your father makes twice as much money as he does, drinking margaritas for breakfast, and Carlos. You know, Carlos, the guy who mows the lawn. Your mother may love you, but she's lost in her own little fantasy world, so don't put too much faith in her. Baby Jesus loves you, but baby Jesus is biblically obligated to love you, so I wouldn't put too much faith in him either. Your dog may love you, but your dog also loves eating out of the cat's litter box and licking his own testicles. He may love you, but he's actually dumber than your brother, so I wouldn't put any faith in him. Your cat may love you, but, oh, who are we kidding? The cat is planning to kill your entire family while they sleep. But I love you. I will always love you, and you can put your faith in my love. Now go to sleep, secure in the knowledge that someday I will come out from under this bed and devour your soul, and we will be together forever. Good night. So I brought a baseball.
I was wondering what baseball was for.
World Series is going on tonight. And I am here entertaining you guys. Which tells me how much I love you guys. But
And
don't count
how
on
little we care about baseball.
Exactly. But, nevertheless, I'm going to read you a baseball story.
Yay.
Yay.
Yay. Yay. This may mean nothing to any of you except Axel.
This one's for you, Axel.
This one's for you, brother. The most powerful sorceress in the western suburbs carried 13 Minnesota Twins bobblehead dolls in her battered leather briefcase. The briefcase went with Maggie Thorsten everywhere she traveled, to her job as an auditor at the credit union, to the grocery store for milk and eggs, to a nearby lake where she would remove her shoes and socks, roll up the cuffs of her charcoal gray pants, and sit with her feet in the water, remembering her late wife and summer days before the cancer and the wasting and the forgetting. There was once a time she needed only 9 dolls one for each player position. And though the purist in Maggie longed for those simpler days, the reality of the designated hitter and specialty players had changed the game since her mother's days. The magic evolved with the game, and 13 was as strong a number as 3 times 3, so she bowed grudgingly to progress, even if that progress made her shoulder and arm ache with the added weight. Each bobblehead was handmade by the sorcerer herself, and was not a licensed product of Major League Baseball Properties Incorporated. Today, Maggie carried one for each player position, one designated hitter, which she had finally warmed to after the added punch and power had proved the difference in a dispute with a conjurer from Duluth, one utility infielder, one left-handed one-out specialist, and a closer. She hardly ever carried a long reliever anymore because if you needed a long reliever, you had probably already lost the game or the duel, whichever you were involved in. And maybe it would have been smarter to have had a sit-up man, but if you planned to live and die with specialized positions, then you might as well just go all in. And where she traveled today, it seemed like the right choice. Sometimes you went with your instincts. Maggie took another moment standing at the Metropolitan Stadium home plate memorial in the Mall of America, ignoring both the cheerfully screaming children who ran around her in a chaotic swirl about the park that dominated the center of the building, and the frustrated, overburdened parents and guardians desperately trying to keep the little darlings corralled, or at least within visual range. With a quick glance up to the red stadium seat mounted high above the water slide and a muttered "In Harmon we trust," Maggie picked up her briefcase and walked out of the amusement park, through the mighty mecca of American commerce, and down to the transit station. Settling on the train for the long ride to Minneapolis to visit the site of the old Metrodome, and eventually target filled, Maggie rested the briefcase on the empty seat next to her. Her peers often wondered aloud why she didn't just keep a full 25-man roster, but then she would need another suitcase, or one twice as large and on wheels, and either way, she only had so much time and power to craft these bobbleheads, and it wasn't like, and if she couldn't get things done with her starter and the handful of subs, well, then she wasn't much of a sorcerer anyway. They also questioned why the bobbleheads weren't created in the images of the Twins' greatest players, not understanding that the magic wasn't wrapped up in the individual, but instead the platonic ideal of each position, which assisted her focus by using archetypes her subconscious understood. Also, creating images of players that she had known and cheered for decades just seemed creepy. Closing her eyes and taking several breaths as the train glided out of the station and started the long turn toward Minneapolis, Maggie asked for the intercession of St. Sebastian and St. Rita in her cause. She needed to make this pilgrimage to the sites of the 3 lost stadiums and the one still standing: the Metropolitan Stadium, the Metrodome, Target Field, and then finally, last, the old Nicollet Baseball Park. But first, Maggie had to cross her territory. The Queen of the North Star would not care about a briefcase full of baseball bobbleheads, or that Maggie was the most powerful sorcerer in the western suburbs. The Queen would only care that Maggie was trespassing in her domain, and it was a damn fool indeed who crossed a greater spirit of place. Or maybe just a tired one, Maggie thought. The general rocking and clacking of the train lulled her into a doze as it passed over the airport and gathered speed. And that's as far as I've gotten with that one. So, but I'm pretty happy with it.
Do you have any idea where it's going?
To the airport.
Well,
Your baseball stadium?
I mean, like, do you know if it's a short story, like what length it's going to end up?
I have no earthly idea. Right now it smells novelette length at this point to me. That's kind of my gut instinct, is 10,000 words, which would be nice because I haven't written anything under 50,000 words in probably 4 years now. So it would be nice to knock a short story down. So, but we will see if that happens or not. So, as some of you know, I'm in the middle of a giant writing project. If you've been following me on social media, at all, you know I'm in the middle of a giant writing project called Ghosts of the Places We Live. And Ghosts of the Places We Live is both a deeply project of my heart, which I think is one of the reasons I'm struggling with it a little bit, and something that I really desperately wanted to do. And I'm not going to actually read you anything from the actual work in progress. What I'm going to read is I'm going to read you the thing that kind of triggered it. So instead of a chunk of that work in progress, and there's plenty of ghost stuff in there. Complete ghost and an abandoned school thing going on. But instead I'm going to give you just kind of the thought basis for it. This is an essay I wrote quite a number of years back, I guess. Also called Ghosts of the Places We Live. I love abandoned, derelict places. When I was younger, I found my way into old buildings all the time. It was a combination of the thrill of exploration, the inherent danger of being in a decaying structure, and the adrenaline-pumping fear of being caught. It was a wonder I didn't end up in more old buildings, or possibly in jail. When I was in my teenage years, we lived in a tiny little rural town, Oney, Oklahoma. The town's official name was Albert because that's what it said on the post office. But the original name of the town was Oney, the school was Oney School, and all the old-timers called it Oney. Albert existed only for government purposes. It was a town in decline. The railroad had not only stopped running trains there, but they had torn up the tracks and taken them away. The population was small. When I was living there, 150, and there were plenty of old buildings from the village's better days standing around empty. A grocery store, a tiny movie theater, a bank, what we thought might have been a jail. On the property my family owned stood an abandoned cotton gin and its adjacent office. I found my way into all of them, exploring with a handful of other adventurous boys and girls. As I grew older, my thoughts became less about the thrill and adventure aspect and more about exploration and remembrance. I developed a sense that these empty buildings had actually been places where people lived and worked. I could feel the echo of those lives in the empty corridors and graffiti-covered walls. As I became older still, I grew less adventurous, stopped wandering into old places. Failing eyesight and a sure sense of my own mortality tempered my love of exploring these lost structures. What interests me now is the history of a place. What was its purpose? Why did it fall into ruin? Who had worked or lived there? And what would they think about seeing the place abandoned now? Now it was all about that remembrance. These places had meant something to people, to the community, to history, and they deserved to be remembered. Oney School was one of those solid brick structures built by the WPA in the 1930s. All the grades, K through 12, went to this one building. It was not air-conditioned, and it was hot during Oklahoma summers. But it did have great big windows and doors, so the air circulation was pretty good. The classes were small, no more than a dozen of us in a class at any time, and sometimes a class might be as few as 4 kids. Budget cuts and dropping class sizes eventually took their toll, and the state closed the school, rolling it into a larger neighboring district, and the last class left Oney School in 1991. I knew it was closed. I knew it was gone. That's not something rare out in rural Oklahoma. The land's dotted with little school buildings that have been left to rot. At some point, the main red building was torn down, probably for safety issues. And this seems a mercy to me, but the gymnasium is still standing. I suspect there was a plan to use it as a community center, and somehow those plans, like so many dreams in small-town Oklahoma, just fell through. Recently, I traveled back there and stopped at the old school, and there it was, a piece of my childhood, a piece of my history, standing forlorn and decaying on the Oklahoma prairie. It was like looking at an old friend who had fallen on times so hard there would be no return. And the best thing that could happen to it now, I think, would be for someone to come along with a bulldozer and level it. I suspect this is how all those old-timers felt about those old empty buildings and ruins that I loved to explore when I was a kid. And I was struck by the fact that not only is it part of my history, but I'm part of its history, however small. I played basketball in that building, went to school assemblies, acted in plays, made out with a girl in the dressing room. The blue paint on the rusting handrails is faded, and graffiti adorns the concrete bleachers, and the parquet floor is rotted completely away. But I know these things in my soul, and I remember them as they were. I am a part of that old building's memories. I am one of the ghosts of that place. There will come a day when that building is no more, either knocked down by man or carved up and reclaimed by the land. I know that this is simply the way of things. Buildings come and go. People come and go. Everything dies in the end. But I will remember that place as it was, and it will always be a place where people lived and worked and learned and played and loved and just were. And someday, when I am no more, I will take that memory with me, and we will both be ghosts. I actually have a piece of the school here, like in my box, that I carry around. What are we doing for time? Tons of time. Oh my God. Tons of time. Oh dear Lord. Lots and lots of time. Okay. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one more piece. One more really short piece. Trying to think of how many of y'all have heard this piece. See, this is the problem with working on a big project for the last 2 years, is that I'm not really writing a lot of new stuff.
We can hear it again, we'll live.
Okay, good. So,
We can always wander off and shop.
There's
You
new people
could.
too.
huh?
There's new people too.
There are new people too. And so, it almost sort of kind of fits this season
Which one?
in its way. I'll read it. He had a mother. We don't like to think about these things, of course. We want our freakishly screaming, tattered, cloak-wearing Nazgul to be, well, a monster. We want him to be relentless and implacable in his pursuit of our heroes across a mythic landscape, so terrifying that we know, should he catch them, he will eviscerate the cute little hobbits, take the ring of gold back to the all-seeing eye, and the world we have come to love in all of its characters, great and small, shall fall into darkness forever. We have to believe in his all-pervasive aura of overwhelming evil. To believe in anything else, and well, it all falls apart, right? But he had a mother, was once bright and filled with that jubilant sense of wonder that only a child can know. He was the kind of child who women smiled at indulgently and men ruffled his hair, who turned his peers into a ragtag army by the sheer force of his charisma, led them on raids against the castle's orchards and pantry, and then turned around and used that same innocent charm to talk them all out of trouble should they be caught, with fruit juice dripping down little chins and crumbs staining tiny tunics. Oh, he could have been anything back before. It all comes of rings. Tolkien, Wagner, the Eddas. Who doesn't love a ring, and who doesn't love a ring of power even more? We all know the bit about the rings, right? Have it burned in our collective memory to the point where we can look upon our real-world, mundane rings with no little bit of paranoia. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky. 7 for the dwarf lords in their hall of stone. 9 for mortal men doomed to die. 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne. We are doomed to die. And because of this, humans, mortal, fragile humans, desire power. We might desire it for different reasons. We might desire power for our own selfish ends, to rule and exploit those we perceive as weak and inferior. We might desire power planning mighty deeds and great works in hopes of lifting up our fellows, best of intentions and all that. His motivations for accepting the ring are lost to history. His fall into eternal night was not remembered in the great epics handed down through the generations. It is only known that those who used the 9 rings became mighty kings, sorcerers, and warriors for a time. until each in their turn fell under the domination of the ring they bore, became thralls of the one. No, he was not spoken of in the same breath as the Witch King of Angmar or Kumal, Shadow of the East, and by the time the One Ring emerged from its long underwater slumber and drew the attention of Sauron, his name had been subsumed by myth. He had become simply the breaker of armies, the bringer of terror, this child of man. His was the most terrible scream. His was the cry that froze the hearts of stout warriors, made elves weep in their deep forest sanctuaries, caused dwarves to rip at their beards in frenzied fear, and the other dark riders deferred to his voice, his wild and undulating shrieks, their battle cry and war banner as they rode, and they never knew that he remembered the little boy playing with his friends, remembered lessons of honor and chivalry, warm beds and lovers lost in time, a life gone to ash and dust, remembered and mourned for the man he had once been until the gristle of his heart could no longer bear the weight of desolation wrought by the heavy silver band he wore, offered as a gift, turned into a trap, and his voice pierces the heavens and freezes the bones of the world in his sorrow. At night, hunched under his cloak, surrounded by his peers, he stokes the puny glowing ember of his lost humanity, clutches it in his deathly grip, refuses to give over completely, even as he is compelled by the artifact on his finger to perform his master's bidding. In Bree he flitted like a shadow, whipped the villagers into a panic, gave it direction, in hopes the populace would do the dirty work of murdering the hobbits for them. On the battered watchtower of Amon Sul, a place where centuries past the Witch King had nearly broken the last strength of man, they cornered the ring-bearer, began to draw him into shadow, and then suffered defeat at the hands of the lost king of Arnor and Gondor, wielding a fiery brand. And the chase that followed, oh, the chase! For a short time he set aside all doubt and sorrow, gave over to the hunt, let the wildness rise up and take him, racing along with his companions, until the great elf lord and Gandalf Greyhain called down the river and swept them all away. It was as the waters closed over him that he knew. The other 8 would see this as only a temporary delay, but he could spy the future spooling out before him as the white waters carried them further and further along. The knowing gave him hope, delicate but true. Drying by the fire, the hubris of the Witch King, so secured his prophetic invulnerability, became clear. He remembered how at the last alliance of men and elves, Isildur took up the blade Narsil and struck the ring from the hand of Sauron himself. How could mere pitiful monsters such as they hope to stand in the face of dwarves, elves, hobbits, and men united? This freeing knowledge settled into his soul as the 9 walking companions set out from the safety of Rivendell. Silently, he prayed they would stay true. Silently, so Sauron would never know. He prayed to Uru, father of all, dreamed of release from his centuries-long torment. He had prayed once before, but under the influence of the ring, the king of men failed, snatched defeat from the victory so hard won that day, and set the stage for the world to burn. Returning to grim Minas Morgul, he dropped his cloak, became the wraith he was named, roamed its halls, a dark echo of the once proud kingdom he had ruled, and destroyed the moment he accepted that silver ring. In anger and self-loathing, he terrorizes the goblin and orc armies of Sauron for sport, until called to serve once more, forced by his master to visit ruin and death on the battlefield, reaping a bloody harvest of humans and animals alike from his flying mount, until the Witch King fell to a hobbit and a shield maiden. The shock of their commander's destruction caused his comrades to retreat back to their stronghold, all pretense of their own invulnerability shattered. That night, he rested his weary head on the rocks, and for the first time in centuries, slept, dared to dream again. Sauron the Eye sent them out on one last mission to intercept the ring, as the armies of Gondor and Rohan assembled at the Black Gate, lay siege to the fortress, and he flew, compelled by the magic of the ring, flew in a desperate search for the object he feared to find, sought his one hope of salvation, and knew he would hand that salvation to his master without question, should he find it, sealing his fate forever. And when the ring, that gold band that had caused so much misery and destruction, fell into the burning heart of Mount Doom, he turned his face to the heavens, wailed his joy, and as death embraced him, he heard her voice calling his long-forgotten name, and he remembered his mother's face.